Welcome to the Core Innovations podcast, where we explore groundbreaking ideas in education, leadership, and human potential. I'm your host, Dr. Russ L'HommeDieu, and I developed the core framework out of my frustrations as both a student and an educator. CORE stands for concise, organized, relevant, and engaging. These four essential pillars can guide educators in delivering content that's streamlined, well-structured, directly applicable, and captivating. This philosophy places the student at the center of the educational experience, emphasizing a high commitment to quality and a profound respect for the learner's time and resources. In each episode, we will talk to leading experts who are pushing the boundaries and transforming the way we think about education, leadership, and human potential. Today I'm talking with Dr. Matthew Condo. He is a doctor of physical therapy and has his EDD. He has been a dedicated physical therapist for 22 years, as well as being a full-time academician for the last 6. His primary area of study focuses on clinical reasoning, with a particular emphasis on the contextual factors that influence healthcare reasoning and decision-making. Dr. Condo brings a wealth of experience from his clinical practice to his academic pursuits, where he is committed to educating the future of healthcare professionals and advancing the field of physical therapy through innovative research. Dr. Condo has led the anatomy curriculum for 3 different DPT programs, and anyone who's ever been through the anatomy program at a DPT program knows that is no easy task. And he is currently developing the first DPT program, and this surprised me, at Texas A&M University System at Texarkana. So welcome, Dr. Condo. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me today.
Thank you, Russ. I really appreciate the time.
Hey, yeah. So, when we spoke before the podcast, we were talking a little bit about, what drives someone to be a physical therapy educator or a healthcare educator. And you said something very interesting to me. You said that you are a proponent of mission-driven physical therapy education. So help me and my listeners understand, what is mission-driven physical therapy education to you?
So what mission-driven physical therapy education is essentially the backbone and the purpose and the reasoning why a physical therapy education program exists. And in my opinion, it's all about the mission. Right. So the mission that we have at Texas A&M is that we want to better East Texas. We want to serve the rural population, and we want to serve rural healthcare. And as you know, there's a lot of still healthcare deserts out there. I've lived in 4 different states now, and it just amazed me that, Texas has huge healthcare deserts. North Carolina, that I've listened to, or I've lived in, has had huge healthcare deserts. Even, spots in Florida and Ohio where I've lived have had healthcare deserts. So really and truly, that's the mission of the program at Texas A&M, is to provide these areas with physical therapy. I'll give you an example. I was on campus in Texarkana here a couple of weeks ago, and I'm an avid pickleball player. And so I was out playing pickleball in the evenings. And folks were asking me, what are you doing in town? We don't recognize you, that sort of thing. And I kind of explained what I'm there for.
Small town.
It's a very small town, about 65,000. And it was really interesting because everyone from high school students that I played with all the way to retirees all said the same thing. We're so glad you're here. This area needs physical therapy like you have no idea. Go ahead.
That's a really interesting perspective. I'm a big fan of Stephen Covey's work. 7 Habits of Highly Successful or Highly Effective People. And he always one of the things that he says is begin with the end in mind. And what I'm imagining here is, like, you're beginning with the end of, hey, there's a lot of people in these areas that could really benefit from physical therapy. And a lot of people tend to go to school where they live and kind of stay in those communities. So what you're hoping is that you'll be able to serve these people in the community. by creating these physical therapy programs and having these students go through in these specifically underserved areas. Is that what I'm understanding?
Well, you're exactly right. And for a long time, physical therapy programs have been located in large urban settings, right? I think there's 9 or 10 physical therapy education programs in Los Angeles. I think Philadelphia has another 10. Obviously, New York City has a bunch, right? But there are these large urban areas. And to your point, if those physical therapy students and then graduates go to school, get educated, get licensed, and then stay in that area, that then actually increases the gap between the urban areas of service and the rural areas of service. So
Right.
if we can start bringing physical therapy education programs to smaller and smaller communities with that mission that we're here to serve small town America, because we don't want you to have to drive 3 hours to go to a PT appointment after a knee replacement, right? So if we can serve these smaller areas with more supply of physical therapists, then everybody's going to win.
Sure. And I can certainly understand that because I actually came from a rural area in New York. A lot of people don't think of New York as having rural areas. But I was the only physical therapist in town 33 years
Right.
ago when I started. And so when I opened, wow, we have this service now. We never had it before. And I think it made a real difference in the community. I like to think it did. So help me understand, here I am, a physical therapy student. How do I perceive this mission-driven program? How do you translate?
Can you repeat the question? I think you cut out there a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So help me understand how mission-driven programs sort of down to the teaching level. So here I am, I'm a student, it's the first day of class. How do I understand this mission? How do I even perceive what this means in my world as a student?
Well, I think in the last question and your response to that last question, you really hit it on the head. We have the end in mind, right, when we start the program. So, I love Stephen Covey's work. I also love Simon Sinek's work, right? And especially
Mm,
his book, Start with Why.
yeah,
Why are you there? If you really don't have a solid why, then as you know from being a PT educator yourself and a PT clinician, PT school is going to be 10 times harder, right?
yeah,
If you're just there because you're not sure what else to do with your life, or you're there because that's what you think everyone thought you should do, PT school is going to be very difficult. But if you have a good why, then you can start making connections with material, right? So, for example, I got into physical therapy through my father's work injury back in the early 90s.
me
And
too.
that gave me that why, because he was diagnosed and had the old school surgery for carpal tunnel where they used to gut you from mid palm down to mid forearm, but he had that
Mm,
bilateral.
wow,
And oh yeah, oh it was terrible. And it really kind of took our family and put him into a spiral for a few years after that.
I bet.
And when we got to that section in anatomy and kinesiology and orthopedics, my ears perked up because that was why I was there. I was there to help people like my father get through that injury with less pain, quicker recovery, better outcomes. And so when you can start with that why, that you need to serve the rural population or you're going to serve the pediatric population, then really it kind of motivates you intrinsically to study a little harder, dig a little deeper into the material, look up another piece of evidence, right? You go that little extra mile because you want to go that little extra mile.
So if I were to encapsulate that, I would say you're building resilience through relevance, right?
Agreed.
You're
I think it's a great way.
right. So you're giving these students the relevance to them, to their lives, to their community, to real people that they're going to make a difference in. And you're helping them connect that to the difficult work of going through PT school and in creating resilience. I think that's just terrific. I think that's the way we all should think as PT educators. Continually connect them to that why, to that why, to that why. Because the work is hard. I mean, you know specifically, I think anatomy is one of the hardest things that we do, and it's the hardest thing to sometimes connect to the why. And you know, this is a great way to really get these students to build that resilience to push through these very, very difficult and arduous programs. So tell me a little bit more about the specific program you're building. I understand that it's a hybrid program. Is that correct? So
That is correct. So,
there's this component of online work, and then the hybrid part of there are these multi-day intensives. Is that basically what I understand the format to be?
that's the basic shell, right? So it is going to be an online hybrid program. Big reason for that, to be perfectly honest with you, and this is why I decided to affiliate myself with Texas A&M, is that I really think online hybrid education is going to be the future of PT education. I think COVID taught us a lot, right?
Why is
COVID
that?
taught us why. Well, I think that we really need to redefine what a classroom is.
Okay.
I think we need to define what the value of the classroom experience is. And, I can tell you that during COVID, I had students that were very engaged, right? I had students that were asking extra questions, right? They wanted extra help sessions. And this was all done over a virtual format.
Yeah.
I had students who conversely were in class in a brick and mortar traditional program that really didn't need to be in class, right? I had
Because they were
students that
more self motivated,
exactly
right? More
right. He's a little more
okay.
self-motivated, and I really do think we need to redefine and really reevaluate what the value of the classroom experience is.
So for this basic like didactic information, this sort of fire hose information, you feel like maybe an online format really works. But then, you know, we get down to the hands-on skills, and there really isn't any way to do that, you know, remotely. At least you can give the basic information, but you have to see these students have their hands on other human beings, and that's where the intensives come in. Tell me about that.
Well, absolutely. So the way the lab intensives work, and you're exactly right, right? There's really no way to substitute hands-on learning, right? So kinesthetic learning is an integral part of PT education. So what the lab immersives do is they will solidify all the didactic content, add in the kinesthetic portions, add in all of the hands-on skills that we as PTs know, right? How to do a joint manipulation, how to adjust the walker for a patient, right? How to properly teach a patient how to negotiate a wheelchair up and down a curb, right? Or in a community obstacle, those sorts of things. But done in a not necessarily condensed, but an intensive lab experience, which honestly hits a couple really key components of not only the educational part of it, but the professionalism part of it as well.
Okay.
Because what we're doing is we're bringing in that content through a kinesthetic format, but we're also having that student come in for an actual work day, right?
Hmm.
So they're coming in from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. and we're working, we're assessing, we are learning the entire time, which, as you know, that's what we're going to do as PTs, right? So we're actually simulating the stresses and the ebbs and the flows of an actual workday through the immersive experience, right? So that when you get that clinical student as, a clinical, whatever
Sure, as a
number,
clinical instructor.
right, clinical instructor, exactly. Then that student has been through an 8-hour workday. I can tell you that when I was in PT school, we would have a 2-hour lab or a 3-hour lab or whatever. I remember my first day as a student in a PT clinic. By 4:30 in the afternoon, I was cooked.
Yeah,
I
oh
was
yeah.
done, right? I remember I had an hour drive from my home to my clinic, and I didn't think I was going to make it home, right? I thought I was going to fall asleep in the car. I was so tired.
I
Right.
bet.
So, well, whatever we can do to not only simulate the workday, right, but also the didactic experience, the kinesthetic experience, and kind of bring it all together, I really think the lab intensives are good at that.
So by simulating a workday, you're helping to improve student engagement because they're starting to make the connection. Okay, this is what life as a PT is really going to be about. Are there other ways to improve or heighten engagement? Because that time is really valuable now. You've got these students, and if they disengage even for an hour, that could be a full, eighth of the experience or whatever it is, right, for the day. So you got to keep their engagement really high. Do you have any advice for how that's done?
Sure, absolutely. How it's done is not only are we going to lay down the foundation for the education part of the kinesthetic or lab immersive experience, but that's also where the assessment comes in, right? So, as as a PT, yes, you're performing the job skills,
Hmm.
but your patients are assessing you, right? You're always kind of, especially with social media,
Yeah.
you're one bad experience away from a bad Yelp review or someone giving you a jeer on Facebook or whatever that looks like. So we're laying down that foundational education, but we're also assessing periodically. So you have to be on your game, right? I mean, with PT, you have to be as good at the first patient as you are at the last patient,
Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
can't have a warm-up patient or a cool-down patient because we've all been there. That last
Hmm.
patient on a Friday afternoon is going to be that, red flag referral that you need to make to someone else, right?
Yeah, for sure. That's where things can get real at any moment. Even your last patient on Friday of a holiday weekend, when you're like checked out somewhere around lunchtime, you can't do that because
Right,
there are human beings
right.
at stake. Like every single patient you see is somebody's father or son or whatever, daughter or mother. And so you can't mail it in on anybody because these people matter. Everybody matters. And I think that is an important lesson for these students to learn. Help me understand though, do you see any specific advantages to a hybrid over an in-person program, especially in the area of rural medicine?
I do. So the big advantages are housing. Honestly, it's more economic
Okay.
than it is anything else, right?
So
So
I'm a rural PT student from, let's say wherever, right? Somewhere out in Arkansas. And I'm calculating my finances to be able to go to school. And, frankly, I have responsibilities at home, whether it's being, caring for my ailing parents or taking care of responsibilities maybe on the farm or whatever it is, right? I mean, like I think people fail to appreciate the complexities of rural life. Like you have responsibilities at home, and it's hard to just extract yourself from that situation and put yourself on a college campus, right? So what you're saying is these students now have access to education that they didn't otherwise have.
that's exactly right. Right. So to your point, rural life is a little different than urban life. I grew up in a fairly urban setting. I lived at home with my parents during PT school,
Hmm.
but they never saw me. Right.
Sure.
I lived on campus, quote unquote, I lived on campus. So what the online hybrid education allows these students to do is maintain their permanent residence in, whatever town they're currently residing in. And then they only need to come to campus for a couple weeks at a time, periodically throughout the academic semester or academic year. Right. So then the other, 46 weeks or whatever that looks like throughout the year, they can be home, right? They
Hmm.
can be engaged and still go to school and not have to worry about getting an apartment, right? Not have to worry about, all the stresses that go on with moving across the country, if you will,
Hmm.
to go, a year at a time to PT school.
Can you tell me a story of a student or an experience that you had during your educational career that you found particularly impactful as it relates to the things we already discussed, the value of rural rural access or hybrid education or the preparedness for clinical settings, anything like that? Are there any stories that stick out in your mind?
When I taught at Methodist University, which is in Fayetteville, North Carolina, that was a very unique situation because the
Okay,
university is right next door to what used to be called Fort Bragg. Right now it's called
okay,
Fort Liberty.
sure.
And we had a lot of folks who had retired from the military or were honorably discharged from the military who decided they wanted to be PTs.
Okay.
And their stories and the wealth of experience and information that they would bring in, it was really interesting educating a group of folks that were Army Rangers, that were special ops and a lot of other, and paratroopers, honestly. and kind of hearing their stories and experiences and watching them interact with the average 22-year-old straight out of undergrad PT student.
Very
And
different
it
perspectives.
really, yeah, very different perspectives, very different critical thinking skills. And it was actually a really good, rich experience just watching those folks.
I
And
bet.
they had,
I bet.
yeah, they had great reason to be in PT, right? Because a lot of them had served multiple tours. And they said, yeah, this is why we're doing this. We're going to either go back into the military as a PT, or we want to serve a community, where we're from, and this is a great way to do it. So that's probably number one on my list, is just that interaction between my military students and my non-military students. It was
Yeah.
really interesting.
Now that we're bringing up the concept of service, I spent a fairly long career with the VA. So, I mean, I understand what it is to work with some of these guys and their mindset. They definitely have a service mindset, and service is at the core of both physical therapy practice and physical therapy education. How do you encourage students and even faculty to embrace this sort of service commitment?
Well, honestly, I think it starts with mindset. Right. We have to understand and we have to realize why we're getting into PT, right? Again, we have to start with why. This is a life of service, right? We are in a customer service job. Yes, it's healthcare related. Yes, it's healthcare affiliated, but it is a customer service job.
Hmm.
We're not in this to become rich, right? We're not in this for the glory of it.
Right.
But
One
it
might even
really,
say a human service job,
that's exactly right. I think that's a good way to put
because
it, right? It is.
it's about servicing the humanity, not
Right.
necessarily the consumer needs, but the human needs, which is the reason, I didn't mean to necessarily correct you, but when I think of consumer service or customer service, I think of a consumer need. When I think of human service, I think of a human need. And I think that really more accurately kind of captures what we do and where the service needs to come from, right? We're not just satisfying a need so that we can get a great review. We're satisfying a human need because this person's life's going to change because you chose to go to PT school. And that's a huge aha moment for a lot of my students. It's like, you are going to change lives. People who would not have been able to go back to work are going to speak your name at the dinner table for years because you made a difference. And I think that really, the more we can imbibe that in our students, the more resilience we're going to build, right? The more relevance.
Well, and I completely agree with you. And the exercise that I do with my students, and I do this in the anatomy course,
Okay.
is I show them a picture of my father standing next to a physical therapist, right? So my father had open heart surgery about 6 years ago. He had an aortic valve replacement done. And the physical therapist who is standing next to him was one of my very good friends in PT school.
Oh, really?
Yes. And, I always ask the student, tell me who these two people are. And they, of course, I'm not, rarely do they figure out it's my dad, because
Hmm.
my dad and I are different heights and, he's obviously considerably older than me. But I always say to them, this is why we're becoming PTs, right? I said, I did not pick Rick, the PT, for my dad. I did not pick my dad to have Rick as a PT, but yet it happened. And I can tell you, I was so glad when Rick was the PT for my dad, because he's one of the most easygoing, compassionate people. And one day after open heart surgery, that's exactly what my dad needed. He needed
Yeah.
that gentle encouragement. And,
That's
I always tell him that, Rick wasn't the top in our class. He wasn't the bottom in our class, but he was the right person for my dad that day. And
I
this
think
is
that's
why
an
we're doing PTs.
I think that's an important thing for PT students to understand. They get to this point, they earn that seat by, clawing and scratching their way to the top. Everything's about the numbers, everything's about the grade. And I have to be honest with you, the top performers in my PT class weren't necessarily the best clinicians, and the worst performers weren't necessarily the worst clinicians. It was everybody found their place. It was more a matter of being right than best, or the right fit than best. So there's no stratification, right? So if you're not graduating at the top of your class, or you're not currently sitting at the top of your class, you know what? It doesn't matter. I've never had a patient ask me what I got on the PT boards.
Right.
Oh, good thing too, because I don't remember. It was a long time
They
ago.
scored differently now than they did for us.
Well, when I went to PT school, we actually had a practical component. It was a full day practical, and it was massively intense, and perhaps a topic for another podcast. But yeah. So I want to hear more about how this sense of service translates through to the community of Texarkana. So now you're sort of embedding yourself in this community. How are you creating any sort of service initiatives that have a significant impact on the community at large?
We are. So we're doing a lot of, it's a developing program. So we're developing a lot of connections with St. Michael's Hospital, which is locally. A lot of the other PT clinics, Texarkana PT is one I know we're kind of talking with right now, to building some community partnerships that when our students do come on campus, we're going to have some community related service that they're going to perform while they're on campus with us. Right.
Okay.
So we're actually going to build that into the lab immersive intensive activities. So there is a
like patient intensives and pro bono clinics, things like that.
That's it. Service intensives, pro bono clinics, community service activities, anything we can do to kind of get our students out interacting in the community, we're going to do.
That's true.
The service initiative at the Texarkana campus is honestly something like I've never seen. It is a campus that's built on service. I was on campus a couple weeks ago.
So the campus, like the college before you got there, already had a service sort of inclination.
Inclination doesn't even scratch the surface.
Okay, so
it's a culture.
So it's baked in. So you're kind of coming into that culture. Got it. Okay.
I'll give you two big examples. Okay, so first example is my program director. We just purchased a motion analysis device, and it's in this massive toolbox, like one of those big roll around toolboxes. She was pushing that toolbox across campus. The entire soccer team came running out to help her with the toolbox.
Oh, really?
Nobody prompted them. Nobody told them, because everyone that's involved in athletics on that campus, if they see anyone in need of help, they run and help them.
Okay.
Right. The entire volleyball team was setting up carpet for convocation right after practice. Things like that.
So the students are acutely aware of their responsibility to other human beings, which makes them uniquely suited to be great PTs.
That's exactly right. And it is a very service-based culture. I remember going on campus. It was the day before freshmen moved into actually, it was the day that the freshmen moved into the dorms, and all the administration were in t-shirts, shorts, and jeans. And, I'm kind of looking around, including the university president. I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Oh, we're going to help the freshmen move into the dorms. Dean, provost, president, didn't matter what your title was. They all helped the freshmen move into the dorm rooms.
So it was an example of service leadership. Like they were.
That's exactly right.
Okay. I think that, what a great environment to work in.
I agree.
So I have one final question. What do you envision the future of PT education, particularly in the areas that we've discussed today? So what do you see PT education being like in, let's say, 10 years?
In 10 years, I think that most programs are going to have at least an online component, right? Whether that is a synchronous component or an asynchronous component. I think that as technology gets better, as communication gets better, we're going to harness that and really use it for the good of PT education. I think that is going to reduce some barriers like physical location. Mm-hmm. But I also think that we as PTs are going to become even more of a knowledge-based profession than a kinesthetic profession, right? So we are moving towards becoming decision makers, right? That's where direct access comes in, right? And all the great privileges like diagnostic imaging that we've been allowed to have here in the last few years. So I think we're going to be much more of a decision maker and much more of a cognitive or a knowledge-based profession. And I think that really lends to PT education going towards much more of a problem-solving approach than just a decision implementation approach. When I
Well, I
got out of
think
PT, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think clinical decision making skills are important for just these younger generations that are coming up, where they're not necessarily getting that algorithm
Right.
installed, right? I think of our brains as sort of operating systems. You talked about mindset. Well, collective mindsets are nothing more than an operating system. And I feel like a big part of our job is to sort of install that critical decision-making mindset operating system in these students. And I'm sorry I interrupted you. You said when you were in PT school.
So when I was at PT school, I was the last bachelor's class to graduate. So even when I graduated, we were still the implementers of decisions, right? We would get the script from
Sure.
the doc, and it said, and I'll take you back a few years. Heat ultrasound massage, right? 3 times a week for 4 weeks. Right? You remember
I
those
remember those
days?
days.
Oh yeah, me too. And that's what you did, right? And only when there was a problem did you ever call the doc. Now we're much more of either I don't have a script, if you will,
Right.
or I don't
Well, we
have a
are the doc.
referral. Right. You don't have the doc. We are the doc. And I need to make those decisions on what my patient needs. And then how do I make those decisions? And obviously that's where evidence-based practice comes in, that I'm not just doing the decision based on what's happened or what I've done for the last 100 patients, right? Every patient's unique, every situation's unique, and I need to put that sort of cognitive load into my decision making.
And and I think that's a really important observation. And I think it is important that we are increasingly living in a world where even our students' time is divided, right? So these hybrid programs, we're kind of recognizing they're out there having this life. They're either working a job or helping out at home. And that's one of the reasons I founded or perpetuated this core philosophy, which is that the education we provide needs to be concise, organized, relevant, and engaging. It's a way of respecting that student's time and saying, we are going to give you the most important stuff. We're going to present it in a way that's going to keep you engaged. And we talked about building resilience through relevance, right? And that resilience is going to lead to higher engagement. So we really hit on a lot of that. And the other thing that's important is when we have them for these intensives, there is, from a faculty standpoint, very little room for error and experimentation. Like we can't, like you have your students for an entire 4 years. You can you can kind of go off the cuff a little bit, but now with these intensives, it has to be concise, it has to be organized, it has to be relevant, it has to be engaging. And if it's not, you lost a huge opportunity with your students that you're not going to get back. So I think that is an important thing to keep. That's why I like that four statement test. Is it concise? Is it organized? Is it relevant? Is it engaging? And do you see any value in sort of that framework in the work that you do?
I see a lot of value in that framework because your 4 tenets really do speak to what a lab intensive is, right? Because we only have them for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And not only that, but for that cohort, we only offer courses, as most PT programs do, once a year, right? To that one cohort.
So they can't like if they don't do well, they for them to come back, they'd have to wait a whole year, and you've just wasted a year of another human being's life.
But they won't come back because they already progressed through the program.
Right.
Right. So if they have a bad cardiopulmonary experience, where you're going to see that isn't anywhere but the NPTE.
Yeah. And the
Right.
clinicals.
Yeah, in their clinicals, exactly.
And the CI is going to be like, why did you send me this student? Like, how did this student get here? And that's the worst thing as an educator. That's the worst feedback you can get from a clinical instructor. Like, how did this student get here? You'd be like, oh no.
Right. So it really speaks to a lot of things that we do or we are going to do as a faculty, right? So Obviously, we want people that have some online hybrid experience, right? We want some people that have the mission in mind. And we're going to have a ton of faculty development, coaching, mentorship, all of that, because we don't have a second chance with that first cohort, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, we have to get it right,
You have to get it right.
or we got to change it on the fly. So we really do need sharp and nimble thinkers working with us.
Well, I really do appreciate this time that you've spent with me. I think I've learned a lot about, what it's like to be in Texarkana at this school. Kind of the kind of place that most people would want to be, whether they're faculty or students. You want to be in a place where
Mhm.
the president of the hospital's got shorts and a t-shirt and is helping the freshmen move in. And you want to be in a place where if you're struggling your way across campus with a heavy piece of equipment as a faculty, that, you know, somebody's going to come to your aid. I mean, let's be honest. There are certain campuses in New York where an air conditioner could fall on you and be 3 days before anybody would notice. So, so I want to thank you for introducing us to you and your program. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Russ. I appreciate the time.